Today I have a really fun pattern for a crochet vest to share with you. So you can wear this vest like I am, sleeveless, or with a t-shirt underneath, or even a button-up top, which makes it a great year-round pattern. I've included links to all of the materials in the description below, as well as the free pattern, which is shared on the Lily Knits website. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. To make this vest, you'll need a 4.5mm or G7 crochet hook, a pair of scissors, measuring tape, a yarn needle, and some worsted weight yarn. I used We Crochet's Mighty Stitch because it's soft and easy to work with, plus I had some left over from my last blanket pattern. I've linked to Mighty Stitch in the video description, and the pattern will let you know approximately how much you'll need. We'll begin by crocheting the front panel from the bottom up using the herringbone half double crochet stitch. I'm making this vest in size small, so I'll chain 66 for the foundation chain. But if you're using a different size or crocheting a different size, then refer to the pattern for how long the foundation chain needs to be. Also, I'm assuming that you know the basic crochet stitches like the chain stitch, slip stitch, and single crochet stitch, just to keep this video short and to the point. So if you're crocheting along with me, chain the number of stitches for your vest size and then meet me back here to begin the first row. Now that the foundation chain is out of the way, we can begin row 1 by making a herringbone half double crochet into the third chain from the hook. I like to work into the bottom bump of the chains because it creates a pretty edge. And also, when we work the border, this will make it easier to crochet into the stitches around the bottom of the vest. So the herringbone half double crochet stitch is just a variation of the half double crochet stitch that slants to the left. And we'll begin with a yarn over and then insert the hook into the chain just like a regular half double crochet. Then we'll yarn over again, still just like a regular half double crochet, and then we'll pull the yarn through the stitch below as well as the first loop on the hook. So with a regular half double crochet, we would have just pulled it through the stitch, and then we'd finish it off by yarning over and pulling through the remaining 3 loops on the hook. But because we had pulled through the stitch and the first loop on the hook, there are only 2 loops remaining on the hook. All we have to do to finish off the stitch is yarn over and pull through the remaining 2 loops. And that's it. That's the herringbone half double crochet. And you can see that it slants slightly to the left. So again, we'll yarn over and pull through the stitch as well as the first loop on the hook, and then yarn over and pull through the remaining 2 loops on the hook. And now we can definitely see how they are slanting to the left. So we'll continue to work the herringbone half double crochets into each chain of the foundation chain for row 1. And when you reach the end of the row, I highly recommend that you count the stitches to make sure that you have the right number. There have been so many times that I've miscounted the foundation chain or the first row and then had to rip out my work because I was off by like a stitch or 2. So yeah, it's a great idea just to check before you work a whole bunch of rows and then realize that you had miscounted. So you should end up with the length of the foundation chain minus the 2 skip chains for the stitch count, as the skip chains do not count as a stitch. Now we can begin row 2. So row 2 and every row from here on out is just like row 1, except we'll be working into actual stitches instead of chains. And a common way to begin a row of half double crochets is to chain 2 and skip the first stitch. So that chain counts as your first stitch, but it often leaves a gap between the chain and the next stitch, which doesn't look great along the edges. That's why I like to use this chainless starting half double crochet instead. So I know that's a mouthful, but I promise you will love this and it will really make your edges look much prettier. So here's how to do it. When you turn your work to start a new row, don't chain. Instead, pull up the loop on your hook until it's about the height of a regular half double crochet. Then use your index finger to hold the loop in place and twist your hook around it to create a second loop on your hook. Now yarn over and pull through that makeshift loop you just made, and this will leave 2 loops on your hook. yarn over once more and pull through both. And that's how to begin the row with a chainless starting half double crochet stitch. Then just continue on down the row in herringbone half double crochets. And once you've completed row 2, keep going until you have a rectangle that measures somewhere between 6.5 and 9 inches, depending on the size you're making. Remember, you can refer to the pattern for the exact measurements. I'm making a size small, so I'm going to continue until I have a rectangle that measures 6.5 inches in height, but yours might differ. And this will create the bottom part of the front panel. And the next step will be to shape the underarm section. To shape the underarm area, we'll decrease stitches along the edges of the rows. At the start of each shaping row, work a slip stitch into the first 2 stitches. And keep in mind that these slip stitches do not count as part of the stitch count for the next row. Now work a herringbone half double crochet into each remaining stitch until you reach the last 2 stitches of the row. Now we'll just skip those last 2 stitches and turn. So we have decreased the stitch count by 4 stitches by skipping the first and last 2 stitches of the row. And we'll just repeat this row, decreasing by 4 stitches each time until 48 stitches remain if you're making the size small, like I am. If you're making a different size, check the pattern because this number will be different for each size. Now that there are 48 stitches remaining, we're going to slow down the edge tapering and skip only the first and last stitch for 2 rows. So slip stitch into the first stitch, and then herringbone half double crochet all the way down to the end of the row, skipping only the last stitch this time. And remember, when you get to the last stitch at the end of the row, that the slip stitches from the row below don't actually count as stitches. So the stitch that you skip is the last full stitch from the row below. So after completing these 2 rows and reducing the stitch count by 2 stitches for each row, that will bring the stitch count down by 4 more stitches. Okay, with the underarm shaping complete, we can now start to shape the top right side of the front panel. Begin with a chainless starting half double crochet, and then herringbone half double crochet into the first half of the stitches. Since I'm working on the small, that will be the first 22 stitches of the front panel. And this is another spot where I recommend counting the stitches. Count both the stitches you've worked into as well as the remaining stitches to make sure that they amount to the same number. So in this example, there should be 22 stitches remaining as well. Once you've worked into the first half of the stitches, turn and then slip stitch into the first stitch. And then continue to work as normal to the end of the row. Once you reach the end of the row, turn and make a chainless starting half double crochet to begin the row. You've probably noticed that we're no longer decreasing on the right side, and that's because this side will stay straight for the remainder of the front panel. So we'll only decrease at the other end to make the V shape of the neckline. So work your way down again and then skip the last stitch. And remember that the slip stitches don't count as a stitch. You are skipping the last full stitch before the slip stitch. And that's how the neckline is shaped on the right side. Continue to repeat these 2 rows until you reach the stitch count that the pattern calls for. For the vest I'm making, that will be 6 stitches since I'm making the small size. And with those rows complete, your work should look something like this. And now we're just going to work 2 straight rows without any decreases to finish the right side of the front panel. And this is just to make the sleeve and neckline just a little bit longer. Once you've completed that, you can fasten off and we can begin shaping the left side of the front panel. And we'll do this by attaching the yarn right next to that last stitch at the bottom of the right side. So we're just going to attach our yarn there and then mirror what we have done on this side. Once you've attached the yarn, begin the row with a chainless starting half double crochet, and then work down to the end. And remember to count the stitches to make sure that the count matches the pattern and that it's the same as the right side. When you reach the end of the row, be careful not to work into the slip stitch at the end. So that slip stitch was there from when we were shaping the underarm section, and it's easy to miss that, which is another reason why I recommend counting your stitches at this point. Then turn your work, and since we aren't shaping this side, only the inside part where the neckline is, begin with a chainless starting half double crochet and then crochet down to the last stitch. And I'm hoping you're able to guess what we are going to do here. Yes, we are skipping the last stitch. Turn your work and then again slip stitch into the first stitch of the next row. So for every row, we are decreasing the stitch count by 1. On the front rows, the decrease happens at the beginning of the row, and on the backside rows, we decrease at the end. This is the exact opposite of what we did on the right side of this front panel. That's it. Keep going until you reach the stitch count specified in the pattern. And then work 2 more straight rows without decreases to finish the neckline shaping on the left side. Then fasten off and the front panel is done. This is what it should look like. So the back panel is going to be worked almost the same as the front. The bottom half and the underarm shaping are done exactly the same, but there will be no V-neck. Instead, after the underarm shaping is done, you just have to work a number of straight rows before shaping the back neckline. And you can find that number in the pattern for your vest size. For the small size, you need to work 14 rows. After those regular rows have been completed, add the neckline rows just like you did for the front panel. I'm going to skip over the back neckline shaping just to keep the video from getting too long and boring. If you've crocheted the front panel, then you won't have any trouble with that part. Now we've got a front panel and a back panel. The next step is seaming them together. Place the front panel on top of the back panel, lining up the edges. You can use pins or stitch markers to hold them in place if you like, and then simply whip stitch along the shoulder seams and down the sides. And don't worry about which sides are facing. We're using a reversible stitch, so it doesn't really matter. So just thread your tapestry needle with some yarn and then do your best to line up the stitches while using the whip stitch to connect the panels. I'm going to connect the panels along the sides and along the shoulder seams, and then come back and show you how to do the ribbing along the neckline, the armholes, and the bottom of the vest. We'll start with the ribbing along the bottom of the vest. So the first step is to single crochet around the bottom so that we have stitches to work the ribbing into. With the vest inside out, choose one of the side seams and then join your yarn into the first chain stitch next to the seam. Then chain 1 and single crochet right back into this stitch. I'm using a different color for the ribbing, but you can of course use the same color as you did for the vest panels. And then just single crochet into the stitch next to it and all the way around until you are back at the beginning. So once you've made a full round of single crochets into the bottom of the vest, join to the first stitch with a slip stitch to complete the round. And now we can add the ribbing. Chain 11, and this chain will be the length of the ribbing minus 1. So the ribbing will be 10 stitches long here. And if you want to make your ribbing shorter or longer, just chain more or less. But I found that 10 stitches looks perfect at the bottom. Once you have 11 chains, single crochet into the second chain from the hook and each remaining chain. So you have 10 single crochet stitches. Now slip stitch into the base stitch and the next 2 stitches. Then turn your work. And now we'll skip the 3 slip stitches and then work back by single crocheting into the back loops of the 10 single crochet stitches. So the back loops are the loops that are furthest from you, and you only want to work into those because that's what creates that ribbing look. And this is what your ribbing should look like at this point. Now we're going to chain 1, turn, and then single crochet back, again only into the back loops. And once again, I recommend counting the single crochet stitches just to make sure you haven't accidentally added or skipped any along the way. So remember that your chain ones, they don't count as stitches. You're just using them to add that extra bit for turning so that it's not too tight at the ends. And then you want to always skip the slip stitches. Okay, now we're just going to repeat the previous steps. So slip stitch into the base stitch and the next 2 stitches. Then turn your work, skip the 3 slip stitches, and then single crochet back, working into just the back loops of the 10 single crochet stitches off the ribbing. And that's how you add the ribbing. So keep going, working around the bottom of the vest. And then once you've worked your way back around, you're going to seam the 2 open ends together. Okay, I've worked around the bottom and I'm finishing off the last row of ribbing by working a slip stitch into the base stitch as well as the next 2 stitches, just like we have been doing all along. And then once that's done, cut the yarn and leave a bit of a tail because we need to connect these 2 open ends by seaming them together. And now we'll thread the tail end through a yarn needle and then whip stitch through both loops of the single crochet stitches on the right side and just the outside stitch on the left. And the reason we're seaming this way is because since the vest is inside out, the seam will look less obvious on the outside. That's it. Secure the yarn with a knot and the bottom ribbing is complete. So it will look like this. And the next step is to work the ribbing along the armholes. So the armhole ribbing is worked exactly the same way as the bottom ribbing. You will single crochet around the armhole first and then add the ribbing. When single crocheting around the armhole, there is no set rule for where to place the stitches. You just want to make sure that the fabric lays flat and doesn't cinch in from too few stitches or bunch up from too many. So take a look after every few stitches and just make sure it looks right. And I also like to count the stitches on each half to make sure that they're roughly even. And then when you begin the first leg of the ribbing, only chain 6 instead of 11, so that the ribbing is 5 stitches wide instead of 10. So that's it for the armholes. The next step is to crochet the ribbing around the neckline. For the neckline ribbing, we'll begin with a round of single crochet stitches, but this time we'll attach the yarn in a stitch near the middle at the back of the vest. And then once the yarn is attached, chain 1 and single crochet around the perimeter of the neckline for 1 round. At the end of the round, join to the first stitch with a slip stitch and fasten off. The neckline is going to be worked a little bit differently from the armholes and bottom edging because of the V-neck. So with the vest facing you, count 5 stitches up from the center point of the V. Then attach the yarn into this stitch and single crochet down into the next 5 stitches. Now we're back at the center point, and the next step is to slip stitch into the next 2 stitches and then turn. Now we'll skip those 2 stitches and work back into the back loops of the 5 single crochet stitches. And then chain 1 and turn. And from this point on, the ribbing will be worked just like the other ribbing. So single crochet back down into the back loops of the 5 single crochets, and then slip stitch into the base stitch as well as the next 2 stitches. Then we'll turn our work. Now we'll skip the 3 slip stitches and crochet into the back loops of the 5 single crochet stitches. And then chain 1 and turn. So repeat this process around the neckline to add the ribbing. When you come back around, you'll seam the open ends together. Once you've whip stitched them together, you can block the vest to relax the fibers, but other than that, you're done. You have just made your very own hand crocheted vest. Try it on and let me know how it turned out in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Lily Knits channel.